So I grew up with the Yali people in the Highlands of Papua. My parents were missionaries, actually, and we lived in a very simple wooden house, no electricity, running water, anything like that. So a Yali woman looked after me when I was small, and she put me in a net bag over her head and would take me to the gardens with her, and my childhood was like perfect. It was idyllic. But bad things did happen from time to time. People would die from very, simple things like infections, malaria, and we didn't go above the tree line because there were beliefs that higher elevations where the spirits lived. They're just mysterious. Like when you go into the high mountains, the trees start to change and it becomes, the heavy moss in the trees, and it's often quiet, very, very quiet. Never mind the spirits. If you get trapped there overnight, you'll die because the exposure to the cold. And it's funny, as a young person, I was a hunter, as all young Yali men are. So that could include frogs, lizards, snakes, sago grubs.
The big ones.
Yeah, the big white
juicy ones.
They're actually really good. Anything alive was fair game to eat. Yeah. But as I grew older, that love of hunting turned into a love of wanting to protect. My heart has always been in Papua. And you start to recognize the tangible reality of the forest is disappearing, and it may be gone in my lifetime. There's not a lot known about biodiversity in New Guinea as a whole. I would say there's probably in places in Papua where humans have never stepped foot. There's possibly new species that are waiting to be discovered.
The people that are looking for a tidal sea in New Guinea, what do you think? Chance or no chance?
I think if there's any left, they will be.
Is this the first time you're doing a podcast?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah?
Yeah, never did anything like this before.
That's good, because I also don't have too much experience in it. Okay. We can start then.
Okay.
Welcome, Kobak Wilson.
Yeah.
It's your full name.
Yeah.
Thank you for being here. I really, really appreciate it.
Thank you.
We are at the Royal Geographical Society in London, next to Hyde Park and the Great Natural History Museum.
Yes.
I really want to thank them for their hospitality. We are currently in the archive room. From what I heard, there is 6,000 plus expedition reports around us from all over the place.
That's
Antarctica.
incredible.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's very fitting because you are an explorer, aren't you? I would like to ask you to introduce yourself in whichever way you'd like.
Okay. So my name is Malcolm, as you said. I also have a Yali name, so I grew up with the Yali people in the Highlands of Papua. My Yali name is actually Ilongo Kobak. My parents were missionaries, actually, in Papua. Went to Papua in 1971, so I was born in 1973 in the Highlands of Papua in a small village. My brother was born a couple years later. Had an older brother who was just came to Papua when he was a baby. But yeah, was born and raised in the Highlands of Papua, lived with the Yali people. I don't know how much detail you want to know about my my life, my childhood.
I'm very interested. Yeah.
So, again, we were born in a very small village. We lived in a very simple wooden house. My parents cooked over a little fireplace.
Really?
We had a little outhouse. No electricity, running water, anything like that. And when my brother was born, he was actually a premature baby and a breech birth.
Mm-hmm.
And my parents had a radio, so they called a doctor on the radio and asked for advice. And the doctor told my mother that she didn't think my brother would survive. Like, she thought they're just in some remote village. They have no ability to properly care for this child, but gave them advice of how to find best to let my brother live. I was only a year and a half old at the time. So my mom gave me to a Yali woman, which is very common in Yali culture. Women will help each other raise children, especially if there's illness or. So a Yali woman named Kombuhwele looked after me when I was small, and it's typical in Papuan culture, put me in a net bag. So they wear a net bag called noken in Papua over her head, and would take me to the gardens with her. And so my first memories of life were like typical any Papuan Yali child, playing in the gardens with my friends. My mother, as a Westerner, would dress me in clothes and send me off with my Yali nanny, I guess you could call her. But apparently I would have inevitably come home with no clothes on and my clothes missing. So my mom eventually gave up trying to put clothes on me. But because of those formative years, Yali was my first language.
Mm-hmm.
And I think on a very spiritual level, I connected deeply with the Yali because of that. So even though eventually I moved first to Scotland. I did my last year of high school in Scotland. Then I moved to Canada and went to university there. And I lived and worked in Canada for many years. But in a very deep spiritual sense, I always felt connected to Papua and nowhere else. Went back over the years many times. Between high school and university, I went back to Papua, lived in the village for over a year, just like when my age would have been at that time, doing things that young men do, hunting, building gardens.
At what age then?
That would have been in my 1920, around then. My dad actually came back to Papua and had bought me a ticket and made me come to Canada and go to university.
Okay. Where was he? And what did he do? Because I heard
so he was a missionary, so he did things that you would think a missionary would do, like share his faith. But he actually was particularly interested in Yali culture, and oral culture. So he learned the Yali language. He studied their oral traditions, and recorded a lot about their traditional religion, their language and culture. You know, initiation rites, things like that. He ultimately did his master's and wrote his thesis on that.
Is Papuan culture also not written down? I suppose.
Yeah, Papuan culture is all oral. So their history, their folklore, their knowledge is all oral knowledge that's passed down through generations. So a lot of things that I grew up learning, I guess you could say, like a Yali father, who was actually my father's language informant.
Okay.
So he was very close to my dad, but his son became my best friend. And so I would go with them when they would go into the jungle. And yeah, we would go. So for example, in a certain season, they go into the high into the rainforest to collect Yali. It's called weremna. It's a type of pandanus, a nut from the higher elevations, and we would go up, build a camp high in the forest, and the men would be collecting the nuts. Sometimes we'd have to help them, but my friend and I, we would go exploring, we'd go hunting, and sometimes spend days out in the forest, and in the evenings you'd be sitting around the fire, and the men would be telling stories about their own lives and adventures, but also telling traditional folklore stories, and also telling, their oral traditions of, the history of the Yali. So those experiences, connected me with a deep love of nature, of the land. And it's funny, as a young person, I was a hunter, as all young Yali men are. As I grew older, that love of hunting turned into a love of wanting to protect and seeing the threats to Papua. And I don't fault Indigenous people who hunt because that's their survival, and they live in. There's a balance. The forest can sustain them, but not wanting to seeing. So when I grew up, where I lived in Papua, you never heard a plane fly overhead. There was no communication with the outside world. There's no electricity. Like, it was literally like living in another world. Like, sometimes, somebody would come from the outside, and they would, I remember as a child, someone talking to my dad and talking about Chernobyl. And I remember being scared, thinking, what's going on? Like, is the world ending? Is something?
Yeah.
And I having no concept of what it meant. But, my father having to explain to me, what had happened, and that, we're not at risk. And, but yeah, that happened months before, but we just found out about it.
Okay.
So that was my childhood, in a place that was so remote and so pristine. As a child, if we flew there was a little airstrip in our village, and a plane would fly us, like a little small propeller airplane. We'd fly back to the town, and you'd fly over endless jungle. And but now you fly over Papua, and you'll see, palm oil, you'll see mining, see roads, see the forest cleared, and you see the change happening. And as I've seen this change over my life, in the last 10 years, it's started to accelerate. I'm well aware of what's happened in other parts of Indonesia. So then you start to recognize the tangible reality of the forest is disappearing, and it may be gone in my lifetime. So, you look in other parts of Indonesia, the island of Kalimantan or Borneo as a greater island is known, is, those forests disappeared in, a couple decades. So having had that experience in a childhood of a special place, and often I didn't share about Papua. For one thing, it kind of was like my special secret. I didn't want other people to know about it. I didn't want people coming there. And I didn't want, I wanted it to be protected forever like that, how it was in my mind as a child. But as I got older, I realized that's not a reality, and something has to be done to protect Papua, or it will potentially will be lost forever.
Okay. Thank you for sharing all of that. A lot of people have heard of Papua, but they know very little about it. I would say it's a little bit of a mysterious island. So if you had to maybe take perspective and give us a crash course, where is it? How is it like, and what makes it so unique?
So Papua is second largest island in the world. So the whole island of New Guinea. So the island of New Guinea is split into Papua New Guinea, and what most people know as West Papua, but it's actually into 5 provinces now, the Indonesian Papua. So in Indonesia, it's known as Tanah Papua. So Tanah is literally land of Papua. Of course, there's a colonial history. The Dutch were in what is today Tanah Papua, and the British were in Papua New Guinea. So that shapes the history of the island and where it is, and its status in the world today. But as far as what makes Papua special outside of that human influence, there's a unique evolutionary history because of the way where the island formed and how it formed. So it's a part of the Wallace Line. So it's it's on the side with Australia and the islands surrounding Australia. So New Guinea and Solomon Islands and Melanesia. So it's unique in that sense already. It shares a evolutionary history with Australia. So you have a commonality of flora and fauna with Australia versus with Asia. The human history is ancient also, but more recent, say, than than in Asia. So migrations happen there. It's also not really well understood how the human migrations happened in New Guinea. So there's different theories around how humans migrated to New Guinea. But yeah, so also the geological history of the region shaped that the remarkable landscape. So Papua, the island of New Guinea is a long island from east to west.
I know you cannot drive.
It's wider than Europe.
Yeah.
And it has the main mountain range down the central cordillera of the island of New Guinea. So if you imagine the island of New Guinea east to west, people describe it as a bird. It looks a bit like a bird,
or like a dinosaur.
And there's a high mountain range along that central cordillera, and those mountains go up to over 5,000 meters. There's permanent glacier on one of the mountains.
Yeah, I heard that. So there is, on that tropical island very close to the equator, there's
the only tropical island in the world with a glacier, but it's also disappearing and will probably be gone in, I would guess, 5 years. It'll be totally gone. There were also other snow-capped peaks which have lost their snow cap, but there's still regular snowfall and at those higher elevations. And then there's also other mountain ranges across Papua, the Foja Mountains, the Cyclops Mountains, the Wondaway Mountains, the Arfak Mountains, and that's in Papua and Indonesian Papua. So each of those places also has unique endemic species and a unique evolutionary history. Many of those places haven't been studied. So that's another interesting part about Papua is you have this incredibly diverse landscape, which allows a diverse an equal diversity of species. It's also manifested in the human diversity, the cultural diversity. Across the island of New Guinea, there's over 1,000 languages, which is just incredible. So that diversity.
How many languages?
Over 1,000. So you can literally have two valleys, and in two separate valleys, they speak different language.
And how different is a language?
So there's like language families, so there'll be similarities, but yeah, they can, as different as Italian to Portuguese to Spanish, like
they cannot understand each other.
Yeah. So you might there'll be some similarity, but yeah, totally different language.
And would they be able to, is there one common language or?
So again, part of that colonial history. So Bahasa Indonesia became the lingua franca across what was the Dutch colony in Indonesia. So in Tanah Papua, they also speak Indonesian. In remote villages, they won't speak it. But in most villages now, they speak Indonesian. That's the national language of the country of Indonesia. But still in Papua, especially the more remote villages, they still speak their indigenous languages. But sadly, that is also something that's under threat. We see that starting to be lost, especially some of the smaller language groups, because some of these communities might only be hundreds of people.
Mm-hmm.
So those languages are dying out.
So in some regions they would speak Dutch, and then what are the other colonial places?
So Dutch was only really spoken by the elites.
Oh, okay.
So and people in maybe in government. So maybe the police, the military, academia would have spoken Dutch, but the actual common language spoken even under the Dutch colonial system was Indonesian across Indonesia, which is allowed now. Indonesia as received independence. That language was already in place as a national language across Indonesia.
Mm-hmm.
So it was a natural transition.
So we have the right side of, let's say, the dinosaur. That's called Papua New Guinea. And then the left side is the Indonesian. How would you call it then? That's Indonesia.
Yeah, it's a part of Indonesia.
And the whole island, you would call it New Guinea, the island of New Guinea?
Yeah.
Okay.
And again, that comes from the colonial past. So as I understand it, it was a Portuguese sailor who first sighted the coast of New Guinea, and which was just an island to him, and he called it in Portuguese, I can't remember how you say it in Portuguese, but basically translates to New Guinea because it reminded him of Guinea in Africa.
Yes, indeed. Okay, we have more than 1,000 languages, many different. So would you say there are very different cultures and traditions, or?
Yeah. So there are some commonalities, like the net bag I mentioned. Almost all people in Papua make these net bags. They're.
What are they exactly?
So I'll explain it. There's typically made by women. There's a plant in the forest. It's a small shrub. They will collect this plant from the forest. They strip the bark and they rub it on their thighs, and they make a string from it.
Mm-hmm.
That string is then it has a natural brown color, sometimes darker, sometimes lighter. And then women will sometimes dye it with berries, dye it with even clay. Sometimes they take orchid fibers and wrap the orchid fibers around the string, so yellow orchid fibers. So that gives it the color and the variety. And then they weave these net bags, it looks like a fishing net, with, again, depending on the style and the woman, it can be, really tight holes. It can be bigger holes. Men will typically have a small bag, just enough to carry fire starting material, the essentials that they need, bamboo knife. Traditionally would have been a bamboo knife, things like that. Nowadays it'll be matches, a knife, and maybe a shirt or something, a water bottle. But traditionally it would have been these other things. Women will have a larger one. Like I talked about myself, I was carried in one as a child. So women will carry their baby in there. They'll also carry all their produce from the garden. They make a rain cape from pandanus from the forest, the leaf of a tree. That will be in their basket, in their net bag as well. So things like that are almost universal. You see them across Papua. The design may look different. The color may be different, but it's quite universal across Papua. On the other hand, there's, like I talked about, the oral tradition of the Yali. that will change from culture to culture. So the Yali have a creation story about how the earth was created and where people came from. Even within the Yali, so there's Northern Yali and Southern Yali. The Northern Yali have a different creation story than the Southern Yali, and it actually makes sense when you look at how it ties to what we understand the human migrations, how they occurred. So, for example, the Southern Yali talk about in an ancient time there was basically a stone tree, and this marsupial ate the base of the stone tree. Stone tree fell on the earth, and there was a giant earthquake. The earth opened up, and people were inside the earth, and they came out of the earth. There was a stream that washed them out of the earth, and they came into the Balim River, which is near it runs, starts up in the highlands of Papua in the west and runs sort of southeast through the highlands of Papua. And so they believe that they were washed out of this stream into the Balim River, washed down the Balim River, and they emerged near a place called Yali, crawled out of the river, set up a settlement there, and then from there they migrated. So that's connects well with how we understand from language, looking at the evolution of language in the region. It makes sense that that's where they came from. But there's also the Northern Yali who have a different story, and it makes sense because their migration would have been slightly different about how they ended up in that area.
And in Papua New Guinea, they speak which language then? Not Indonesian?
So the national language in Papua New Guinea is Pidgin English, so Tok Pidgin.
Okay. Can you speak it?
No. Oh. So that would be the common language in Papua New Guinea. And from what I understand, I've only been to Papua New Guinea a few times, but apparently a lot of people in Papua New Guinea understand English because Tok Pidgin has its roots in English. So yeah, Papua New Guinea is, because of that colonial history, is in many senses very similar to Tanah Papua, but in other, especially modern Papua New Guinea, is very different to West Papua today.
And the border that is quite vertical, splitting the island in two. Is it a little bit of a imaginary border, or do they also see themselves as really being two different things, different cultures, languages?
Very much a colonial creation.
Okay.
Yeah, so Papuans, all Papuans as Papuans. There's quite famous songs that talk about how they're one people, and so Papuans very much have a sense of an identity as a people group, as being Papuans. So,
okay.
Yeah.
It is a little bit opposed to the things that how I would understand it if they have different languages and also slightly different traditions, that they would not see themselves as one, and that wasn't there a lot of warfare between them as well?
So there was and is still tribal conflict. So yeah, it's not completely harmonious, but in terms of modern Papuans would very much view themselves as being one people, and ethnically, when you look at them, Papuans are, black skin, curly hair, versus Asians within the region who are lighter skinned, often straight hair. So they have that ethnic, even though obviously Yali people look different to the Dani people, who look different to Momanet people, different tribal groups, but they are, in the same way as maybe another person would look at Europeans, and to them, Europeans all look the same, although obviously there's diversity even within Europe. But.
Yeah, I spoke to Jeff yesterday.
Yeah.
That just got the Edge
Fellowship.
Fellowship. So congratulations to him.
Yeah.
And I tried to connect him with Muse Opiang, who was the first person to do research on the Attenborough's long-beaked echidna.
Yeah.
On the
long-beaked echidna.
The long-beaked echidna, because it wasn't discovered back then. And he immediately told me like, but he's I wonder if they speak then the same language even.
They won't speak the same language, no.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah. But they'll be able to speak English to each other.
Yeah, right? Okay, so they would speak English to each other then. Okay. I hope they connect. So Papua is home to one of the most remote populations on Earth. So I looked it up a little bit. The internet says that there's hundreds of uncontacted tribes in Papua still.
I doubt that.
Yeah, So first of all, is that correct? And also, have you encountered or worked with groups that had minimal contact with the outside world?
Yeah, so that is a claim that people make, that there's numerous uncontacted groups. Highly unlikely. There potentially are very small nomadic hunter-gatherers living in places like on the southern lowlands and the northern, so in the Mambramo floodplain or in the southern lowlands, who that might be the case, but I find it highly unlikely. There's so much human incursion into those areas now. There's roads being developed, there's palm oil, there's mining, there's timber extraction. So there's a lot of human presence, not to mention there's over 100 years of missionary activity, and even within, not just missionary activity from outside of New Guinea, but even within New Guinea, there's been missionary activity from tribe to tribe. So it's highly unlikely that there are uncontacted people groups, but there's possibly more likely small people groups who are deliberately avoiding contact, will have encountered people from the outside world, but are choosing to avoid them. My dad in 1973, I believe, for example, and I've seen this quite a bit on Instagram lately, because there's a people group called the Momina near Dekai, and there's a song that was recorded by some traveler, these people singing, and it's beautiful singing. And I've seen interesting claims made on Instagram about when these people were contacted. Well, I know because it was my dad, and he, and I've seen the photographs and heard his stories, and that was in, I think 1973 or 74 or something.
Is it I saw that video. It's a guy that is carrying his child on his back, and then he's singing
coming out of the forest. Yeah.
Is that so? That's the people that your father discovered, or like first contacted, or
So and again, even my father people would say that, he's like, well, I didn't make first contact. They were contact with each other, fellow Papuans for centuries.
Contact from somebody really from the outside world.
The first time to document it for the outside world.
Yeah. So even the word uncontacted, we have to define it a bit, because they always. I don't think there is any uncontacted group of people on Earth. First of all, they all have been contacted at some point.
Yeah.
But indeed, they're the one that lasts, that are still very, very isolated. They avoid contact, I would say, and there's some places on Earth where that is still the case,
and that's possibly the case in Papua too.
Okay.
I would say there possibly are, like I say, small indigenous hunter-gatherer communities who are choosing to avoid, the outside world, whether it's miners, other tribal people, but choose to live their traditional lifestyle, avoiding that outside world.
Yeah.
They'll know it exists. And like I said earlier, growing up, we never saw planes flying overhead. Well, in Papua now, anywhere in Papua, you can't last a day without hearing at least one plane go ahead, if not many planes, because that's become for many communities, that's the only form of transportation. And because of that, the impact of the changing world that they live in, no longer are very few communities are still living exactly the way they used to live. So, they import rice or other things from the town, clothing.
Okay.
So there's planes going in and out of villages. Also, people are now, exporting crops like coffee. And so there's a lot of aircraft flying around Papua now.
Yeah. So, but there are still groups that are self-sustaining.
Yeah.
Okay. But that is getting rarer and rarer.
And sorry, I was going to say the reason I talk about that with the airplanes. So as a child, we very rarely saw planes, but people had obviously seen planes. When you talk to the older generation of Yali, so like my father Yariut, they had never seen planes until he was a small boy, and he remembered being in the gardens with his mother, and this, I suspect, would have been, if not during World War II, just after World War II. And he said a plane came overhead, and they thought it was actually two people carrying something, because it's probably a plane with two legs. They thought there was two people carrying something, and they were flying around the sky.
So two flying people that were carrying something. Wow.
And then the plane came or what they thought was two people carrying something, and swooped over them in the garden. He said they all ran into the jungle and hid.
Of course.
So probably the plane saw people, was interested, and flew over them and scared them all, and they ran into the jungle.
Oh.
So yeah, you think of that story, and seeing something like that for people who at that time effectively lived in the Stone Age. They were still using Stone Age implements, had no contact with the outside world. I actually recently asked an elderly Yali, I said, did you before missionaries arrived and you started, did you know that there were people in the outside world? Had you heard about white people or people that looked different than you? And he told me that actually they already knew, again, when he was a boy, so this man would be like 70 years old. He said when he was a boy, they already heard stories that would make their way through the different people groups about, people that look different, people with white skin and straight hair, and that they heard about like steel, they heard about guns, how they had these things that would explode and they could shoot things like people far away. So they had already heard these stories. And then you transfer that to today, and you can go into a remote Papuan village. So one of the villages we work in, we have a Starlink internet, and I can do video calls with someone anywhere in the world. Yeah. The people going to our school there now, young Papuans, are learning about outer space and and other countries and cultures, and yet their parents had never seen an airplane or steel.
Yeah.
So it's an incredible jump in literally one generation that Papuans are making.
Right. Yeah. So much changed in the last 100 years. How do you feel about that? That those groups with such deep connections to the natural world, such beautiful traditions, are now getting economically developed and technologically developed?
Yeah, it's as I suggested earlier, that the child in me wanted things to be kept the way they were forever. I didn't want anything to change
because it was so.
It's just so beautiful, so beautiful, and
it was nice living. Like
yeah,
that.
like my child in my mind, my childhood was like perfect. It was idyllic. Nature was perfect. My life was perfect. As I've got older, there's still that sort of nostalgia that wants that, but I also am realistic and realize that the world is evolving and changing, and I have to be pragmatic and realize that, for example, the average Papuan wants their children to have, education, healthcare. They realize that they're moving beyond where they used to be into this global economy where you have to have money to survive, and so they want to be able to make money. They want their children to be able to make money, to have a better life, have an easier life. Like that's another thing. Like as much as I loved my childhood and it was a beautiful life, it was hard. Like working the gardens is hard work. They didn't have, until my parents came, they didn't have healthcare, so people would die from very simple things like infections, malaria, and
it was maybe a little. So it was a nice way of living, maybe a more healthy way of living. It was also your child's view.
Yeah, exactly.
And the reality was harsh living.
Yeah.
But so is living in society and civilized places.
So there's pros and cons to both. So for example, in one of the beautiful aspects of that culture I grew up with was a sense of community. So like in a small village of a couple hundred people, everyone knows each other, everyone cares for each other. Of course, there's conflict, people have disagreements, but those are resolved within the community. People, care for each other. If someone passes away, well, the rest of the community step in and support that person. Everywhere, like I would go roaming in the jungle, and bad things did happen from time to time. My friends and I were playing in the forest one day, and one of my friends was swinging on a vine, and he slipped off the vine, and he fell onto a stake that like pierced his stomach. So quickly, like we found some adults in a garden area, and they came and they built a stretcher and they carried him to the village, and then my parents were able to get him medical care.
He might not have survived.
Yeah, he probably wouldn't have survived without without intervention.
Was he brought to a hospital then? Or?
Yeah, he was actually flown out of the village to a medical clinic. But again, that there's no ambulance, there's no 911, but there's people there that are to respond and help, and but also that sense of community. Like, so for example, gardens. You don't build a garden on your own. When it's you need to build a garden, all your friends and neighbors come and they help you build your garden. If someone builds a new house, the whole community steps in. So 2 people will go collect the leaves, the pandanus leaves, to make the roof. A few more people go to collect the poles that make the roofing structure. More people have gone to prepare the wood to make the outside of that. Mm-hmm. The women go and they collect clay to make the fireplace in the middle. Like, so everyone, it's amazing. Like, a house will be built in like that because it's the whole community works together to make it happen.
And when you say community, how many people are we talking about?
Anywhere, if like villages can be as small as 20 people to a few hundred people.
Okay.
Depending on the size of the village. So where I grew up when I was a boy was probably 200 people, a bigger village.
Okay, and you would know most of them?
Oh yeah, you'd know
all
everyone.
Of them?
Yeah, and every adult would know you. Like, you may not know all the adults, but they would know you for sure.
So that's incredible. There is a certain amount of people, a number, I think it's 120, that we are able to know their names, their histories, have a relationship with. And I think our brain is only capacity is under 20 people, something like that, which makes sense from a tribal perspective.
Interesting you say that, because that's something I've thought about a lot lately as I go back is to Papua and in the villages. That is something that is missing in our Western culture, is that sense of community, and Papuans will know, even in other villages, they'll know all their relatives, no matter how distant they are. They know, like, oh, that's my dad's brother's aunts. Like, it's just they know. Like, it's amazing. I'm like, how do you remember all of this?
Well, it does make sense from a reproductive point of view, right?
Yeah.
Maybe there is some extra strength in our brain to especially know who we are related to and everything like that. Also from a tribal perspective. It's amazing. So you were there until you were 18, and then you went to Scotland.
Yeah.
And so how was that shift? Did it make you see the place that you grew up in a different way, being in Scotland and then going to Canada afterwards?
Well, first of all, it was incredibly hard.
Bit of a culture shock there.
Yeah, huge culture shock. I also, for many years, I didn't share much about my life with people. I found people quite ignorant and racist, and so I quickly learned not to share much about my childhood. I didn't talk about how I had lived or grew up, and I experienced people making fun of me or teasing me. Like, so I stopped talking. So they say, "Oh, when you grew up, did you like wear a grass skirt and and carry a club?" Like,
after 18 years old, that does surprise me. I would say adolescent times.
Yeah,
it's people after.
Yeah, it's
18.
quite shocking.
Wow.
Even in the workplace later, I experienced like some pretty shocking comments from people. Like, so I didn't talk much about my childhood. I didn't. But then conversely, I struggled. So, for example, I can remember the first time I went with friends. This is when I went to Canada, and my friends, we were at school going on a trip for sports, and on the road, the highway traveling, we stopped at a service station for a break, and my friends are all ordering food at a fast food restaurant. I don't remember what it was, probably McDonald's, but I didn't know how to order or what, so I just didn't say it. And they're like, "I'm not hungry." So my friend was like, "Do you want a drink? I'll buy you a drink." And I was like, "Okay, I'll take a drink." So he orders me a drink. I'm standing there, and the person like hands me like the cup, and I'm like, "But there's nothing in the cup." She like looks at me like I'm an idiot. She's like, "Yeah, the drinks are over there." So I go over to where she points, and they have the drink machines, but I didn't know what to do. So I'm like watching people to see what they're doing, and I see someone put their cup in. So I put my cup under, but nothing happens. I'm like, but I'm like embarrassed. I don't want them to know. I don't know what to do. So I'm like watching again, and then I realized, oh, the person's like actually pushing the cup in the back, and it's making the drink come up. So experiences like that, like just now I look back, it's kind of funny, but as a young person, it was like really, like I felt like really nervous and anxious and, um, yeah, really out of place. So, and then in all of that, like I started to make friends and, made a life, but I really longed for wilderness, I didn't like being around so many people. I didn't like the noise. I didn't like the weather. And I
Scotland.
yeah,
Yes.
and I desperately missed being in the jungle, being in mountains, and also my language. Like even though I went to schools that taught in English, so I spoke really good English. There's something different about speaking in your own, like, the language that you grew up speaking.
So you didn't speak English with your father?
I did, but we spoke both in the home, like growing up. So and like when I first went to like English school, I was 6 years old. And I know now, my mom told me the teachers complained that I didn't speak English properly, like well enough, and they actually told my mom, you should take him home and like get him to speak English properly, and then send him back to school. My mom like laughed and said, well, if I bring him home, he's just going to disappear in the jungle and he'll never learn English.
Amazing. So you did have a stronger appreciation for the place that you grew up in. It does sound, when I picture the stories that you're telling, it does sound like Mowgli-esque.
I had a
swinging on vines.
We had a fun childhood. Yeah, like.
And so did you guys grow in the community that you lived in, did sustenance hunting then as well?
Yeah.
And that, of course, that is totally normal. There was no supermarket, or
no shops or anything. Wow. So my parents would order and they would ship in, like, flour and supplies like that. But we also had to live off, like, we ate a lot of sweet potato, vegetables that grow there, the local vegetables, taro, bananas, the many fruits, obviously. Wild mushrooms. We would eat eggs from brush turkey, like but you collect them in the forest. Lots of the local meat.
Yeah.
Even frogs and
really,
insects. We ate insects.
The worms.
Yeah. So in those cultures, like I grew up. Yeah, the sago grubs.
The big ones.
Yeah, the big white
juicy ones.
They're actually really good. I remember as a child, my friend and I went. We would collect them in the forest, and my favorite way to cook them as a child was we would put them in bamboo wrapped in leaves, and then you put the bamboo over the fire, and it like steams them inside the bamboo. But one time, my friend and I thought it would be a good idea to bring some. We had this like wooden cabin. We had, like I described, my parents had like a fireplace, and we could cook on it. So my friend and I brought these grubs back to the house. We put cooking oil in, and we like fried them and add like salt and pepper. And then my mom came in while we were eating them. She was very unhappy that we were cooking grubs in her kitchen utensils.
Okay. She didn't appreciate the. Okay.
She grew up in the UK, so I mean, she was quite a remarkable woman herself, and lived, in a, isolated from the world she knew, and had to learn a new language, and she ate all sorts of things, but grubs was something that she wasn't willing to eat. So
that's fair. It's fair. Yeah, and the bushmeat is everything you can find probably then in those days.
Yeah.
Marsupial. Is it also 80% of in Australia? 80% of mammals are marsupials.
Yeah.
Is it also something like that?
Very similar in Papua. So yeah, mostly. So especially Highland Papuans have a protein deficiency. So a lot of the streams don't sustain fish because they're so fast moving. So that's why, like, especially traditionally Papuan Highland communities, basically any protein source. So that could include frogs, lizards, snakes, insects, but also, I look back, it's anything alive was fair game to eat. Yeah. So like, we would shoot small birds,
mice
all the way up to larger marsupials. Cassowary, which are very large birds.
Oh, true. You had cassowaries around you. And so are they really that dangerous?
They're very dangerous. Really? Cassowary and wild pig are the two most dangerous animals. Well, the large animals. The most dangerous animal is mosquitoes because they carry malaria. But in terms of what you would traditionally think of as dangerous animals, like cassowary are very dangerous. They're large. They're aggressive. If I say aggressive, if they feel threatened, they're aggressive.
They'll rip open your belly, huh?
They honestly look like dinosaurs.
Raptors, yeah.
Yeah, they have the feet are huge, and that central toe that they have becomes a vicious weapon.
Yeah.
And I mean, I'm sure you've seen videos and pictures of them. They're such amazing looking animals with that thing on their head. They just look like dinosaurs.
Yes.
But so they can be dangerous animals. And then wild pig are also can be very dangerous animals.
Who were introduced?
They're introduced, by humans. So I believe 6,000 years ago, I think.
Oh.
Yeah. So not really that long ago.
But still, it's quite a long time. Okay. I thought it was maybe, I guess a couple 100 years ago.
Yeah, no, so quite a while ago. Also, around that time, dogs were introduced. So, and then
is it then European dogs, or is it Asian dog like the dingo?
Yeah, like the dingo.
Oh, okay.
So there's still there's ongoing research, for example, in the New Guinea singing dog, and I believe recently it's been decided it is actually can be identified as a unique species.
Is it called so it's kind of a dingo? It's looking like a dingo.
It's similar to the dingo,
but the dingo doesn't bark, I think, in Australia.
Yeah, and that's the same as a New Guinea dog. So
why is it called a singing dog?
Yeah, because they just howl.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
And so you would say the most dangerous situations in the highlands where you grew up were what then? The mosquitoes, or are there not?
So not above sort of 1,000 meters. There's no malaria. But below, so where I lived was above 1,000 meters, 1,500 meters. But we would often go down into lowland jungle where you're exposed to malaria. So malaria is probably the number one. The other risks were it's a very mountainous, dramatic landscape. So falling, like I knew one boy that fell and died when I was growing up.
From a mountain or in a ravine, or
he was. There was a place we used to climb down to go swimming. Quite dangerous, and I look back, it's crazy. But we'd climb down like this series of like sort of cliff faces, and then the last bit was pretty dangerous. And we would sometimes jump into the trees, grab the tree, and then climb down the tree to go swimming. But this boy I knew, he was younger than me, but he basically doing that fell and died. I also knew of a boy who was collecting breadfruit, fell out of the tree and died. So those were other ways, like you could fall and also drowning. The rivers are very rough, so sometimes you try and swim across a river if there's no bridge. And I knew of a couple of people like fell into rivers and drowned when growing up.
Because it's there's such different levels in altitude.
Yeah.
That's okay.
So, I mean, you have everything from small mountain streams to like the Balim River, and the Heluk River. So where I lived was in between these two valleys that met. And both those rivers are where they meet there are huge raging rivers. And I mean, to give an example, I once saw a log being washed downstream, and this log was probably 2 or 3 feet thick, and it got trapped between two rocks. So the log is wedged between two rocks, and you could see the current forcing it, and then it just snapped in half and kept going. So an incredible current. So if you fall into that river and you're not able to get out, pretty dangerous. But
and there is no predator. The dingo is a predator on the
not dangerous
on
to
the
humans.
island.
Yeah,
but that is one of the predators. Are there other big predators on the island?
So they only, so there's quoll, which are like a marsupial. They're a small, carnivore.
Cute, but
they would eat. Yeah, so they would be eating mice and smaller mammals, probably birds. But that's another part of that unique evolution of New Guinea is, there's no tigers, there's no rhinoceros, there's no deer were introduced during the Dutch colonial era, and they've spread all over New Guinea. They're an Asian deer, but other than that, there's not a lot of the animals that you would expect in a rainforest, compared to, say, the Amazon or the Asian rainforests like Kalimantan. But conversely, that's the other interesting part about Papua is that unique evolutionary history. It has a whole unique
a lot of animals
biodiversity.
Had the freedom to just evolve without too many predatorial pressures, which made a lot of interesting animals.
So and we know there were ancient predators, like there was the thylacine, and there was also the marsupial. There's a marsupial tiger that was there,
really?
Millennia ago. So So historically there were some quite special predators, but they've, again, because of human pressure and also introduced species like dogs. I think it's believed that thylacine probably went extinct in New Guinea and Australia because of the introduction of dogs, competing for, not necessarily humans hunting thylacine, but rather competition over food source. And same with dogs, like the singing dogs probably couldn't have hunted the thylacine, but thylacine lost their food source. The dogs were probably more efficient as group predators. And
so the people that are looking for thylacine in New Guinea, what do you think? Chance or no chance?
I think if there's any left, they will be in New Guinea. So there's remote places in New Guinea. And we know from fossil records they were obviously in New Guinea up until, for sure, certain, we know a few thousand years ago. There are, I would say not in Papua New Guinea, but I would say in Indonesia and Papua, there are places that are remote that don't have the human presence, but also potentially, the singing dog haven't expanded into these regions. And there are lots of anecdotal stories across New Guinea. You can just do some searching on Google and you'll see there's lots of anecdotal reports describing animals that sound like thylacine.
What do they sound like?
That I don't know. I don't, honestly, I don't even know. That's an interesting thing with thylacine is there's such little known about them because we hunted them to extinction before they were really ever studied. So now as scientists go back trying to understand, there's such little known about like the behavior of thylacine, the sound they made, how did they breed, and we don't know much about them.
Mm-hmm.
Which is where indigenous knowledge is valuable because oral history sometimes retains some of that information. So, for example, in Australia, you see cave art, and you can see, thylacine are featured in their cave art, and it's evident that they were obviously an important species for them because they draw about them frequently, and so likely it was a prominent feature of their culture. So, I would imagine in New Guinea would be the same, and that's something I'd actually like to do is interviews in remote communities to find out, is there any remnant of the oral history about that animal that would give us a better understanding of what it was.
And have you, that sounds really, really remote from somebody like me that's coming from a tiny country, Belgium. It's a bit difficult to wrap my head around a place like you described that you say no people have been there. Are you speaking about ever? Or
I would say there's probably in places in Papua where humans have never stepped foot, up in the high mountains, because first of all, for Papuan people, those high elevations, first of all, it's cold, and traditionally Papuans don't have clothes, so they going into those higher elevations was, and also with climate change, even in my lifetime, my dad talked about frequently in some of the high mountain passes when he would be walking between villages, coming across frost or snow, ice pellets, much more common. And then today it's quite, it's less and less common. So you also see, sweet potatoes growing higher than they used to grow. But I say that because previously Papuans didn't go to these higher elevations. Also, like I can speak firsthand from the Yali, there were beliefs that higher elevations where the spirits lived. We didn't go above the tree line because that's where the spirits were, and we believed in the lakes, the little lakes and rivers. There were spirits, so you wouldn't go up there. And so those traditional belief systems meant those areas people didn't go there. And maybe occasionally people strayed to those places, but even if people have been there, they haven't spent time there. Or so to me, the thylacine, there's possibly new species are waiting to be discovered, and there's very little known about those habitats. But there's very little, really. There's not a lot known about biodiversity of New Guinea as a whole, but especially Papua, and even more so these like remote, and not just these remote highlands, but there's also remote places like in the Mombramo River Basin where there probably is some human presence, but very minimal. We probably nomadic hunter-gatherers who pass through, but maybe for years they don't go back there. So there's potentially all sorts of discoveries waiting to happen in Papua. But
a couple of things. So do you think those stories about spirits are put in place to protect certain areas, or why do you think, like from a psychological perspective?
So I don't think those people created those stories to protect those areas. I think they're just mysterious. Like when you go into the high mountains, especially as you start, the trees start to change and it becomes, the heavy moss in the trees, and it's always fog, and it's often quiet, very, very quiet. And I think I don't know if it's the density of the air or the moisture. And you can,
moss is a good isolator.
Yeah. And you just, little, like, for example, there's a frog in the high mountains that sounds like a little bell. It's just ding, ding. And it just sort of like, goes through the forest, and it's very mysterious. Like, so it's just, I can remember as a boy, like, it was mysterious. There's a bird in those high mountains, and I don't even know today what it is, but it's a mimic, so it can copy human sounds, or it copies any sounds. But I remember being in the forest with my friend and hearing a baby crying, and we're like, "There's no babies here!" Like, and got scared because we thought it was like a spirit, and we ran back to like where my friend's father, Yali, was, and we're like, "There's a spirit there." Like, we heard like a baby crying in the forest.
Yeah.
And he laughed at us. He goes, "No, that's a bird." That bird copies, like, he goes, sometimes it'll sound like people talking, or sometimes it even mimics like someone cutting wood. You'll think you hear someone chopping wood, but it's the bird. Okay. So I think that habitat is just naturally mysterious. Then you get even up in those higher elevations, and it's not like anywhere else in Papua. And there's this forbidding environment with ice and snow and cold, and and we were warned, if you go up there, like, never mind the spirits, if you get trapped there overnight, you'll die because the exposure to the cold. And so there, you have. I don't think they necessarily thought about it as protecting those habitats, but now it's a great tool to use as that traditional belief system that we can use to create protected areas because it's naturally protected, and then we just formally recognize it as such and fuse the two. So we talked about this with the Cyclops, from the expedition we had with the Cyclops, because the local people, previous expeditions had failed because the local people also have these superstitious beliefs that if you go there, you'll upset the spirits, and so they wouldn't lead expeditions. They knew where the echidna were, but they weren't willing to lead people there because they didn't want to upset the spirit world.
Yeah, let's maybe sketch that expedition a little bit. So there's an animal, Attenborough's long-beaked echidna, that is one of the 4 echidna species that was lost to science for about 60 years. The only reason they knew it was ever alive is because one naturalist, a Dutch naturalist, brought back a specimen to the Naturalis Museum in Leiden. And that's the only specimen in the world of that animal. The only evidence that it ever existed. And in 2023, you did an expedition
with also the Oxford University and the University of
Cendrawasih University.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And you guys
got the first images
ever of a living Attenborough's long-beaked echidna, which is extraordinary. And that was in the Cyclops Mountains, which is in the northern part of Papua.
Yeah.
Okay. And you can continue now.
So that expedition, we spent 2 years before the expedition even came, going into those villages, meeting the people, developing a relationship, letting them know what we wanted to do, learning about their knowledge of the mountains, asking, like, do you believe this animal is still here? Do you know this animal? Yeah, we know that animal. It's here. We haven't seen them in a long time, but they told us there's a lot of interesting, kind of tying into what we were just talking about, sacred animals and sacred places. So the mountain is sacred for them, the higher elevations. We also interestingly learned that they have clan leaders, but the clan leaders are divided. So one clan leader is responsible for the mountain, and the other clan leader is responsible for the ocean. So they have a separate authority
in one clan.
Yeah.
Beautiful.
Yeah, but we also learned that the animals in the forest, some of them, like the echidna, has a special place for them. It's a sacred animal. And then that's a terrestrial, and then the ocean is a blue marlin. So they believe. So when they would have conflict, one of their peace ceremonies was the terrestrial clan had to find an echidna, and the ocean clan had to find a blue marlin, and they would exchange it as a peace offering.
Oh, so it is two separate clans.
No, it's within the same village,
okay.
but there. So it's kind of hard to. There's like along the coast of the Cyclops Mountains. There's, I believe, 7 clans. But within sorry, and I say clan, but it's actually within each clan. There's 2. They call them Undawafi chiefs. So one chief is for the ocean, and one chief is for the mountains. So if they had conflict, and it could even be like just village to village, you might even be the same clan, but. So they would have this situation where the mountain they would bring the echidna, but as we talked about
and the blue marlin,
they
would have to go
to the ocean to
search
catch one.
it, because it's so hard to find both of them.
And for, if you imagine, for local fishermen trying to get a fish like a marlin, which is so quick and so big and strong, like
there you go, yeah.
So I asked the thing. I said, "Well, didn't sometimes like you never were able to catch them?" He says, "Oh yeah, but then you it might be like you give up and you forget that you're in conflict." So it's actually a really good way to resolve conflict.
Okay.
So you may not never ever catch that animal, but it means there's a ceasefire until you catch it. So and in effect, it just ends it, and then you forget about it.
Okay, so if there is a conflict in those clans, the chiefs would order somebody to go look for
echidna or the ocean. You go to the ocean or the mountain to find this peace offering.
And it would be resolved if both those 2 people would find their respective animal,
but
and then they bring them back.
Yeah, but it's a ceasefire till then, anyways. Like you call a truce until it's done. So
and they eat them at the end, or Okay, yeah.
So we knew the animals there. We know it exists because we describe. Oh yeah, that's this animal, payanco, they call it, and that's a part of our.
Payanco is the name for the Attenborough's long-beaked echidna.
Yeah. We knew that it existed. They told us. I went into the forest with friends, and we saw the poke holes, so we knew they were still around.
And how did you know it was not the other species of long-beaked echidna?
That I didn't know, but I knew there was an echidna there, I should say. So, but we knew highly likely it's something has to be that one, because the one specimen's from those mountains, and it's unlikely that both would be in the same mountain.
Because of the division, it's also a little bit. It's not a peninsula. It's not an island.
It's not. It kind of juts out a little bit. But that's part of that unique history. So it used to be an island that was pushed when the 2 plates collided. It was an island got pushed into New Guinea.
Okay. So the Cyclops Mountains.
Yeah. So the expedition was a lot of groundwork for 2 years before we ever came in with a team. developing their trust, and as a result, like our expedition team, we also included representation from every clan. So we had minimum seven at all times with us to support us as field assistants, and one of them in particular is a guy named Zachariah, who passed away sadly over a year ago. But Zachariah was, again, a hunter, but he knew the forest. So he was able to guide the researchers to show them where to put the camera traps. And they had some pretty, really, I should let James tell you the story, but they had some pretty special moments in the mountain where, so for example, when they went up to the higher elevations and they were about to enter the sacred territory in the high mountains, Zachariah and another of the villagers said, we need to pause here. We need to pray for safety before we go in to get, and James said it was like deathly quiet, and he goes, he finished praying, and then there was like this like thunderclap, and he was just like, he goes like he got like goosebumps and like nervous, like it was just like, this is the most amazing thing. And he goes, and they're like, okay, now we can go. So then they went in and kept doing the expedition. But
as that happens, probably there.
Yeah. So but again, like for me, the really neat thing about that is the importance of incorporating that knowledge into the research. The people that live there know better than anyone the forest and what's there and how to find it, but then to take that to the next step. And so when you create a protected area, what better way than to incorporate the traditions of those people? So for example, the another interesting story, they believe that the grizzled tree kangaroo, Dendrolagus sinistus, it's a tree kangaroo that lives in those mountains.
Say the name again. Just the English name.
Grizzled tree kangaroo.
Grizzled tree kangaroo.
There are tree kangaroos in Papua.
Yeah,
it's crazy.
Okay.
So the grizzled tree kangaroo is a beautiful animal, and
it's a brown one, huh?
It's gray.
Gray?
Yeah.
Okay.
Dark to light gray. But they believe that it is the guardian of the mountain, the grizzled tree kangaroo, which is interesting because it's not a dangerous animal. It's an omnivore. But they believe it's the guardian of the mountain, and they tell stories that, if you try and they're very intelligent. If you try and shoot them, this was an actual, like, elder told me, he says, they'll just laugh at you, and sometimes it'll just dodge the arrows, and sometimes it'll catch the arrow and it'll just break it and laugh at you. So, but I don't believe tree kangaroos are catching arrows, but
they're not that smart, are they?
But it's a beautiful story, and it's but those are neat things that you can tie into like a conservation project, that these traditions of they value this, they treat this animal that it's the guardian of the mountain. So there's your symbol for your creation or your conservation project, is the tree kangaroo is the guardian of the mountain, and it's a beautiful animal. The echidna is this, it's the critical to making peace. Well, there's another, incorporate all of this into a story to protect a place, and the traditional values that this mountain is a protected sacred place. So that's a part of our protection plan, is that we already have it's a protected place, a sacred place of local people. Now we're going to formalize it and involve them in the protection of the place, whether it's as park rangers or
it's it ties into Yappenda, which is an organization, fascinating organization that you co-founded. How did it come to life, and what is you guys' mission today?
So Yappenda, it's an abbreviation. It means Yayasan, which is foundation, Pelayanan, which is service.
That's Yali.
Those are Indonesian words. Papua, the island, and Nenda, which is the Yali word. So Nenda is like love. So it's basically a foundation for the love and service of Papua. Our mission is to protect Papua. And the other aspect of that, I say a key pillar of that mission, is involving the indigenous people in that effort. They should be fundamental to the conservation of Papua. They should be making the decisions. They should be involved in the research. And their voice should be heard in every aspect of whatever happens in Papua. So a lot of the work we do is around empowering indigenous Papuans, whether it's their education, healthcare, helping them develop sustainable economies, sustainable livelihoods, is making their life better and putting them in a position where they can. What's the actual? Trying to think of the best way to put this, but if you're desperately poor, you don't have healthcare, you don't have education, and a timber company comes and say, "Can we buy your forest from you?" You're not in a fair position you're going to accept it because you're desperate. Versus if you're comfortable and you have the opportunity to maintain your traditional way of life, but you also have healthcare, education, you have options. Also, that education means that you're not going to be taken advantage of. So, if you do choose to sell your forest and, you sell your forest to a mining concession and you think $1 million is a lot of money, but you don't understand that in actual fact, that mine is worth $1 billion.
Yeah.
Then that's not fair. So is ensuring that Papuans are in a position where, and if they choose to sell their forest, then who might argue it's their forest, but being in a position where they are able to do so fairly and with informed consent, as the saying goes. So yeah, that's who Yappenda is. It's always been my dream to do something like this in Papua. I spent a lifetime making connections and meeting people, never knowing if I'd actually be in a position to start this, but always in the back of my mind that one day I would try. And then a few years ago, I met a lady named Anne Lambert. She's the founder of the International Conservation Fund of Canada. And we had conversations for several years about Papua and the importance of Papua. And ultimately, she supported me financially to start Yappenda. They're still our primary donor and support our work. And
how long ago was this?
This was
founded?
about 4 years ago.
Okay, so it's quite a new organization.
Yeah, so
Exciting.
quite new. So so through her support, we started Yappenda. I was living in Canada. My brother was living in Papua. He went back to Papua. He married someone from Papua. He's lived there basically his whole life. So he's an Indonesian citizen. I can't start a foundation in Indonesia. I'm not an Indonesian citizen. So I wanted it always to be indigenous Papuan. So with my brother, we formed a board from people we know. It's a mixture of people in Papuan academia, Papuan government, Papuan business, and traditional leaders from Papuan communities. So we formed a board, formed the organization, started like 4 years ago. And then 2 years ago, I was working with the police, funny enough, in Canada.
Yeah.
And quit my job, and I'm doing this full time now.
Yeah. I read somewhere that you're decorated police officer.
Yeah.
What's that about? A little bit of a side quest there.
It's
you don't have to go into it too much if you don't want to, but yeah.
It's basically, I mean, I had a very successful career. I did a lot of interesting work.
In Canada.
Yeah. And I think sort of that person who I am in terms of like wanting to help people, which is conservation, is a part of that. So in policing, I had opportunity to do things like I was instrumental in formation of human trafficking unit. I had the second successful conviction in Canada for human trafficking. So yeah, I had a good career in Canada for police officers who serve over 20 years with no, with exemplary service, with no disciplinary issues or anything like that. You get it's called a police exemplary service medal. So I have that, but
okay.
It's not special. Many people have that medal. So
you are exemplary.
Yeah,
that's the most important.
So I was a police officer many years. My last few years I worked in national security, actually, in Canada, in policing. it was quite an interesting job. I got to travel, but my heart has always been in Papua. And when this opportunity arose, and with my wife's support, she said, she knew this is my life's dream. She said, "No, 100%, I support you. You have to do this." So quit my job and gave up my pension and and my safety and
Yappenda.
And started Yappenda.
And well, that's beautiful. First of all, thank you very much for doing that. It's beautiful. If your heart is somewhere and you get the luxury,
which not everybody has, to make that choice, then I would recommend everybody to make that shift.
And it's a hard shift, if you're comfortable and you have a good life and everything like that. But yeah, you weren't unfamiliar with the jungle and like that life.
And it's funny,
it's more comfortable for you there.
It's, these things are all true, that to give up financial security and these things, of course that weighs in. But it's funny, I was talking to my oldest daughter, and she reminded me, she says, "Dad, you always told me that doing what you love is more important than any amount of money in the world." And I'm like, "Oh yeah, I did tell you that." So, I kind of need to practice what I preach.
Yeah. That made you change.
And follow my heart. But that, and obviously these other things, and my wife's support, if my wife said, "No, you can't do this, that's irresponsible," my wife was like, "No, this is your dream, like you have to follow your dream, and if it doesn't work, it doesn't work, but you have to try."
So Yappenda is mostly, you would say right now, what are you mainly doing? Are you educating the people of Papua, or trying to empower them
through education to make those good choices?
Or is it more of a animal conservation project?
So it's if you go on our website, you can see our strategic plan. It breaks down exactly what we're trying to do.
Go there, people.
So yappenda.eco, but it's actually many layers to what we're trying to do. And there's critical things that we need to do right away. So those involve things like recognizing land rights, enforcing protected areas. So for example, the Cyclops Mountain, Indonesia has done a good job of creating protected areas in Papua. The problem is the Western world, which, talks about the threat of climate change, the importance of biodiversity, doesn't provide the financial support to expand on that. So, Indonesia has, for example, the crown jewel of Papua. It's a project in West Papua. They've set aside, I believe, over 5 million hectares of primary forest as a protected area. But they need Western support and investment, financial support to make that a reality. Local organizations want to protect that forest, but they also have economies that they need to run. They have education and healthcare and infrastructure they need to pay for, and if the money's not there, then they start turning to natural resources. So that's another aspect of what we're doing, is working with local government and leaders, trying to find those solutions, trying to find the money to make these dreams a reality, supporting local institutions. We're fortunate in that we're an indigenous Papuan organization, but also people like me. I've lived in the West. I have connections in the West. I speak Yali, a Papuan language. I speak Indonesian. I speak English. So I have connections to I can network within Indonesia, with the international world, within Papua. So
a unique position.
A unique position to be in, but an important position in Papua. As far as some of the other things, like the education, like we've started a school in partnership with another foundation. Part of the goal of that school is that those children will be the future leaders of Papua. They'll have a good education. They have healthcare. We're starting a clinic next month. And that those children will be, 10, 15 years from now, there'll be a generation of young Papuans, indigenous Papuans, who are educated, healthy.
Yeah.
As we know, nutrition impacts, so malnourished children don't learn as well. Like we saw this early on in the school, is, these kids are hungry. It's hard to focus when you're hungry. Like it's hard, a kid has an infection in their ear and they can't hear the teacher, just needs antibiotics. Like, so to fix these issues so that you have a future generation. But quicker than that, we want to empower the current generation of Papuans who are, in university, young people who love nature, who love their people, who love their land. And ultimately, they're the ones who should be making decisions about what happens in Papua. So empowering them, giving them the opportunity, giving them the voice. As you know, Jeff Wanda is one of our staff. He was a student at the local university. We found Jeff. We brought him onto the expedition team. He did a very good job on the Cyclops expedition. And he is... he actually came to Oxford last year on a little short exchange we did with Oxford University. Did some speaking about Papua, about the work we're doing, about the expedition. And he since was successful, received a Edge Fellowship, Zoological Society of London. He's just completed some training in Thailand. He's back in Papua now, and he'll be doing additional research on the echidna, trying to establish the distribution. So we identified them on one location. So we want to now determine, are they more widespread, and get a rough idea of what the population is like, how critically endangered they are. And then that will help to inform how we develop a plan to protect the species. Also, we would like to see it recognized in Indonesia under Indonesian law as a protected species as well. That's something we're working towards. So yeah, that's another component. People like Jeff. We have other people on the staff who are developing.
He's very excited.
Yeah. So they're going to be the future of Papuan conservation in the interim, and then you have another generation coming through. So that's another aspect. We also have some plans for ongoing expeditions and research in Papua. As I said, there's huge data gaps in Papua. It really is an unknown place. So we really need to understand what is that biodiversity, what is the value of that biodiversity to the world. It can also, understanding just how valuable it is can inform the conversation surrounding how to, protecting Papua and protecting these landscapes. So that's a part of what we're trying to do. We're also working on producing a film about the work we're doing. Again, showcase the beauty of Papua to the world, the diversity of Papua. And then within that too, as I talk about the research, I should backtrack a little bit, is we want to build a research cultural center that will be the hub of ongoing research in Papua, but it'll also be a place to celebrate Papuan heritage. So for example, these things we're learning in these indigenous communities, they need a place where this can be celebrated and not lost. So everything, these stories about these animals and these places, traditions, whether it's singing or cultural ceremonies, this is a place where we can celebrate these and bring people from all over Papua. We can do collaborative work. We can bring in other organizations, other indigenous leaders, and try and develop more collaboration and partnership, because as we all know, working together, we're a lot more effective than, as the islands working alone. And that's something we've already seen in a few years in Papua, is the importance of us being that conduit connecting people, whether it's within Papua, within Indonesia, but also the greater world, to work towards that goal of protecting all of Papua.
You are tackling it, the conservation, the preservation from Papua's nature and culture from all angles.
Yeah.
Societally, politically.
Yeah.
And also in protecting habitats as well. So
yeah, that's perfect.
Yeah.
You need all of those factors together, right? Or would you say there is one
that is most important?
In preserving our natural
they
world?
are all intricately linked. The key to actually making it happen is people. Like, as much as I would love to just throw a protective barrier around a natural space and protect it for eternity, there are people who have lived in that landscape for thousands of years. there are also greater factors at stake, like national interest and international interest, and so they're all involved in that conversation. And all, someone who lives in Belgium may never go to Papua, may not even know where it is, but in a sense they have a connection because, as we all know, we live in a world where climate is changing. We all have an interest in the natural and cultural heritage of this planet, whether we know it or not. So obviously Papuan people are the key to that, but anyone in the world is a part of that conversation and should be concerned and interested.
Okay. So I think it's a good ending, and I would like to ask you then, where can people follow and support the work that you do and your adventures?
Okay.
There are many of.
Yeah. So our website, as I said, Yappenda, yappenda.eco. We also have Instagram, Yappenda_Papua. From Facebook, Blue Sky. Yeah, just search Yappenda Papua, you'll find us.
Many great expeditions coming.
Some exciting expeditions coming up, potentially a film coming up. Our main partners are Rewild, American conservation organization, and ICFC in Canada. So those are Arosha is a European conservation organization, faith-based. They are partners with us as well. So yeah, so those are organizations that you can support that support us. But in us ourselves, yeah, there's lots of places to look up Yappenda and find out about what we're doing. And if you're interested more in our work, you can contact us, and we're happy to engage with people from anywhere.
Connect.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you so much, Malcolm. I really appreciate this conversation and everything that you are doing and
thank you very much.
Have done. Yeah. Cheers. Thank you very much.
Appreciate it.
All right. Bye-bye, guys.